I can understand how something works much more through touching it and interacting with it with my body than having it explained to me or seeing it without doing it. I'm a learner through doing. My name is Annalisa Barron. I'm a resident artist at LM Studio. This is Hier, France, in Provence, and I am doing a residency where I'm making pigment from both buildings and the landscape in this area. And I try to use my materials in a way where they tell a specific story. So where am I, who am I, and what am I looking at? I ended up being interested in where my materials came from because you spend so much time with them. You touch them, you smell them. Eventually with paint, eventually it gets on your skin and you wonder, what is this? And with sculpture, your material has a lot to do with what your work means. So I looked at paint as a material and kind of wanted to know, what does it mean? And pigment has an incredibly rich history. That's something that you can mine so much information out of one pigment. Geology, the history of of trade routes, all sorts of things. How color had both personal and medicinal meaning sometimes. And I wanted to have the experience of knowing exactly where my material came from, whether it's a building or a specific place, up in the hills or somewhere that didn't seem to be as important as maybe other historic locations. So I also see it as a way to bring attention to a location, as this is worth, literally taking a piece of and putting into a painting. So I wanted that experience of knowing exactly where it came from, what was in it. I use a milk protein called casein. And also I wanted to just have new colors and new shapes in my mind. There's a lot of imagery that you're inundated with every day, and I live in, northeastern states, Pennsylvania, New York. I've also spent time in the Pacific Northwest, still north, so you do see a lot of the same shapes and a lot of the same flora. But I also haven't really intentionally looked, because when you walk past things all the time in your life, it's not something that feels novel, and it's not something that you necessarily spend a lot of time with. I love the fact that when you draw something, it takes you a long time to even see what it is, all the nuances of the shapes, because you're kind of a lazy looker. And then I wanted to come here and have designated time to look at the colors and the shapes of things that would be a little bit new to me. And one of the cool things that came out of this is actually this very tactile experience of the plants and of the stone and of moving things around. So I think my unexpected, the thing that I really will love the most is unexpected, because it's my memory of how strong the aloe plant is. It was it was this aloe plant that had already been removed from a garden, but just cutting it off of the plant, you just respect that thing. That is a hardy, incredible plant. And then also getting the sort of pieces of stone or bauxite to just sort of shed off of a larger one. I just like the way you can tell how the material is sort of holding itself together by how you can pull it apart, if you will. So that's where I kind of came from, is I wanted to have a more personal knowledge of what I was working with and what it meant to work with it. I identified a color palette, so specific pigments that were used in a certain moment in Norwegian history where the national identity had to become separate from Sweden and Denmark and these countries that they've been allied with for hundreds of years. So I've worked with the Vesterheim Museum, which is a Norwegian-American museum in the United States, to verify these different pigments that I work with exclusively. So I work with orpiment for yellow, I work with lithopone for white, and I brought that set of pigments, right, which I do buy, but they're specific. I brought that set of pigments here. So the sort of beginning point is still the color palette that has to do with my identity. And then the specific thing I wanted to add and I wanted to talk about is, like, you know, in your journey of where you go, right, you add these memories of color, these memories of texture and shape, right? So this is the first location I would like to do more. So it's the trial run of this project, Ground from the Ground. And the pigment is the material for the imagery and the painting, and that's what's important to me, because that's the thing that I feel like has the most history to it and the most information. Always have this interest in being able to identify what something is. So sometimes I feel disconnected from my art supplies and from my work because I feel like I can't fully know, like, why this color has this particular hue, or just like, where did it come from? What is it? What's my relationship to it, right? So it doesn't necessarily have as much to do with my identity as it does my curiosity to know what is this? What am I working with? So for example, there are different blues that I've seen in different contexts, so I feel a certain way about them, right? But if I don't understand the history of that context, it's very hard for me to know why I'm responding that way. So I wanted to have this sort of microcosm of knowing what it would be like to go out into the world and find a color, or to feel how something gets broken up, like feel how it wants to break, if it's really brittle or really soft. Just because when you read about the discovery of these colors historically, you only have access to a certain amount of information and not necessarily an experience, if that makes sense. I think that what I'm hoping for is that introducing colors I haven't seen, textures I haven't seen on certain plants, shapes I haven't necessarily seen, that it will open up my mind a little bit whenever I'm looking at like folk paintings, certain types of brushstrokes, certain colors, because I think there's a long history of stylizing things that we've seen in nature and then actually leaving the area where that plant was or that color was, and then painting the memory of it in another place, and it starts to evolve. So, for example, you have people who were painters that learned a certain style of Rococo painting with specific flora, and then maybe they moved to Sweden, to Norway, and then they're recreating some of those forms without the reference. And I love the fact that the imagery and the brushstrokes and the style evolves as you move away from that original thing you represented. So I actually want to look at some of the shapes here and leave, and then have it basically evolve through painting it until it becomes something else, maybe. both of my parents have one Norwegian parent, so they're both half Norwegian, but the side of my family, my dad's side of the family, doesn't really know very much about their background, and I know a lot about where my grandmother was from, and well, the milk protein casein that I put in it, and then some of the other tempura mediums that I've worked with, they're very, very old recipes. So I'm not totally sure how long they will keep their color, but those paintings and the things that were made when I look at it's called the Craftsman's Handbook, and it's recipes from like the 1500s. So I'm hoping that the paint will last for a long time. Porquerolles, l'église de Porquerolles, Sainte-Anne, et Porte de Nil, la gauche de la mer. Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's like a meditation by repeating a motif.
I think that there is a meditation to it by repeating it, but I would say more than anything, it is a very intentional and present way of making a movement. So with a lot of rose mailing, you are literally holding the paintbrush perpendicular to the surface and moving it while twirling it off of the surface of the painting. So it's something that you could do over and over and over again, but you are essentially an ice skater on your skating rink, which is your surface of your painting. And if you stop paying attention, that brushstroke will look terrible. So it's also just like a way of training yourself to just pay attention to what you're doing. There were a lot of family members that my mom had that were about the same age, and a lot of them passed away at the same time. And I realized how important it was to my mom and other people in the family to remain interested in our heritage so that it didn't get lost with those people passing away. So part of it is to just make sure that our family still has an interest in where we came from. So, for example, no one speaks Norwegian in our family anymore, but my aunt moved back to Norway, and so when she visits, I feel like I have a connection to it. But I think it's more wanting my family, and especially my mom, to continue to be connected to
her parents and
Yeah, have you been to Norvège? Norway.
no, I'm hoping that this project takes me there.
Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Usually singing the whole time, which is only when I'm like alone, completely alone.